Good morning. Back again. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about the second installment of chapter 3. Going to actually get into the theory of demand. And I've had students ask multiple times, just what is demand? What defines demand? And to me, the simplest definition of demand, it's a consumer's willingness or desire or want to seek a good or service, and at the same time being willing and able to pay the price of that particular good or service. There are, if you think about it, there are certain services that you may have a willingness and a desire to have. I mean, I have a desire to own a Mercedes. I don't, because I'm not willing to pay the price of a Mercedes. I definitely have enough money to buy sushi. However, I don't like sushi, and I'm not willing to seek out sushi. As a corporate director of payment integrity in the Buffalo market, I had definitely the willingness and desire to seek additional employees to add to my team, and had the financial backing to bring those individuals on. But the talent pool was so shallow in Buffalo that you had trouble just finding those individuals. And at some point, because that talent pool was so shallow, it raised the price of that good or service, and that good or service being the labor component of the production service, it raised the price to a level that I could not afford that individual. So even though I had the desire, I didn't have the financial capability to afford it at a or above a certain price. So if you think about it in those terms, we are making those decisions on a daily basis based on our demand. There's a lot of things, and we talked earlier about unlimited wants and limited resources. And most people, as long as it is a desirable good or service, you have unlimited wants. As we talked about earlier, more is preferred to less. So in that vein, that's what we're talking about on demand. And there are certain factors that impact demand. One, and probably the most important one, is price. Price is a major driver. If I've got $5 in my pocket, am I going to go to Starbucks and spend $4 and some change on a cup of coffee? Or am I going to go to McDonald's and get the breakfast meal that's going to cost me $4 and some change? And I'm making those choices on a daily basis, just like everybody listening to this video, where they're making these choices. And a lot of these choices are driven by price. It's especially in the economy we live in right now, and inflation rampant. Price is a huge determinant of how we make our demand decisions and what goods and services we demand. Second thing is just buyer's preference and information. As I said, my preference that drives my demand for sushi is I don't like sushi. And at any price, I wouldn't want sushi. So, but again, that's personal preference. Also, the information piece of it is, with the internet the way it is right now, we are just being bombarded on a daily basis, actually minute by minute, by new information about a multitude of goods and services. We have to sift through that information and determine what's valid, determine what's real, determine what's rumor, and make those preferences and drive our decisions based on that information. If you think about the last time you went to the doctor's office, you went into the doctor's office with a set of aches and pains or some type of illness, and you sat down and talked to your provider, and your provider came up with a treatment of care, and based on he gave you multiple options, and based on the prices of those multiple options, you may have chosen option A over option B, C, or D. So that's where information is helping you drive it. And with this uncertainty that's in the world that we live in today, information, it's really difficult sorting through the information. If you think about, you got up this morning and you had $100 in your pocket and you wanted to invest it in the stock market, At that point, you're trying to use the information available to you, and most of it's coming from the internet, on which stocks to buy, how many shares to buy, what's the future price going to be. Also, you're looking at prices of related or alternative goods or services. So we'll go back to our coffee example. You can go to Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee. Dunkin' Donuts sells it, McDonald's. I mean, most places sell a cup of coffee. And you're going to make your decisions based on the prices of the alternatives. And that goes back to what we talk about, the opportunity cost. Always remember that individuals or consumers, whether you're a buyer or seller, you're making determinations based on opportunity cost, optimization, and you're making decisions based at the margin. So what's the opportunity cost of those alternative goods and services impact what we demand, or the quantity of a good and service we demand on a daily basis. Buyers' income, and when they talk about income, to me, it's more important to talk about disposable income. So if I'm making $50,000 a year, I've got the same income. $50,000 would be the same gross income across all the states in the United States, maybe. But if I lived in Tennessee, where there's no state income tax, then I have more disposable income than an individual living in the state of Kentucky that has a state income tax. So income drives a lot of your decisions about what goods and services you select on a daily basis. So typically, you think of the more income and the more disposable income that you have, you are willing to maybe buy that Mercedes automobile, or you're maybe willing to go out, for steak 3 times a night. Or if you're at an income level that is much lower and inflation's bothering you, you've got other financial obligations, maybe you're home eating SpaghettiOs or mac and cheese every night. So your income and your especially your disposable income helps drive those, decisions about supply and demand. The other thing, one of the last 2 things, is you talk about demographic factors. If you're a younger individual, you have a certain utility level that you're trying to optimize. That utility level may be different than if you were an individual 65 years or older. If you're an individual, in your teens or early 30s, or maybe into your 40s, depending on whether you're male or female, when you're going to buy health insurance and you're looking at the benefit plans, depending on what your financial situation is, or more importantly, what your physical situation is as regards to illnesses or pre-existing conditions, you're going to buy different benefit plans. Also, as you get into your older years and you move into like a Medicare Advantage plan, you're going to be looking at things like skilled nursing services. You're going to be looking at surgical procedures, because as you get older, you're going to require more healthcare goods and services. And you may buy a healthcare plan that has a fixed copay of $5 or $10 for an office visit, and a fixed amount of out-of-pocket for an inpatient stay. Whereas if you're a much younger individual and don't require a lot of healthcare services, you may buy a high deductible plan, which is almost like an indemnity plan or a traditional indemnity plan. And you purchase that because you know that given your physical status or your health status, you're not going to require many goods and services. So you base your buying decisions or your demand decisions on your demographic factors. One thing that they notice with an older population, and the population in the United States is gradually aging, they see a bump up in, RVs and mobile home sales, ocean voyages or cruises, changes in the way they buy healthcare, changes in their food consumption. So there is a lot of the factors that drive demand, or the demand quantity demanded based on your demographic information, your age, sex categories. And then lastly, you want to talk about buyers' expectations of the future. And we see this as buyers try to estimate what is going to be not only the future value of that good or service, but what the price is going to be. And you see it a lot in cell phones, computers. You know, you've got a cell phone, you know, my cell phone is, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. You know, am I going to get a new one? No, because mine's working perfectly fine. I don't use it for a lot of technology. I use it to call people. I use it as a GPS, and you know, it works perfectly fine. But when I do decide to buy a new one, I'm going to be looking at when's the new version of a particular cell phone coming out. What's the technology going to be, and you know, best guess of what that price is going to be. And I may either delay my decision, or I may buy the current model at a significantly reduced price because I know that it goes back to preference. I know that's going to be good enough for me. Same thing with computers, same thing with, you know, buying a new model of an automobile. People looking to buy a house, they're trying to guess at what is now the time to buy houses. Everybody talks about the housing pricing, housing market being a little depressed. Is now the time to buy it, or is it going to be in the future the time to purchase that home? And everything at that point is driven on, again, back to personal preferences, back to your income, back to what you future expectations you think will be. And if you think about the stock market, and I think the authors get into the stock market maybe in chapter 4, but if you think about the stock market, individuals are betting on what they think the future price of that stock is going to be. You know, what they think the capital appreciation is, what they think the dividends are going to be, and they are trying to establish what the future expectations are going to be. If you take all of these 6 impacts or shifters or whatever you want to call them on demand, and if you determine that all other things equal, then price is going to be the driver for most goods and services. Remember, ceteris paribus, all other things equal, nothing changes. If you take that assumption or make that your driving parameter on those shifters like 2 through 6, it leaves you with price. And price for most goods is going to be the deciding factor in most individuals' demand decisions or quantity demanded decisions. Again, I can't stress enough that in a true economy, all other things equal, consumers are making decisions at the margin, they are optimizers, and they're always looking at their opportunity cost. Just to talk for a few minutes about just some kind of intricacies of demand. When you talk about the quantity demanded, it's, you know, basically you're talking about the quantity that buyers are willing and able to buy at various prices of a particular good. So, and it goes back to some of the examples we've talked about in the past. You know, if I'm looking at buying a particular stock certificate on GM, there are a certain number of certificates I'm willing to buy, or certain stock transactions I'm willing to make based on different prices and based on my expectations of what GM stock is going to be in the future. So that's what you're talking about, quantity demanded. And they also talk about a demand schedule. And a demand schedule is nothing more than, you know, a table that lists here's different prices and here's different quantities demanded. And that information in that demand schedule, then you take and you plot it, and that becomes your demand curve, which shows those different prices and quantities as you slide along that. Remember, it's a downward sloping demand curve. So as you slide along that downward sloping demand curve, that demand schedule gives you the different quantities and the different prices of any goods and services that you're willing to be interested in or willing to pay for as you slide up and down that demand curve. And as they talk about quantity demanded, your authors, and it's an important point, quantity demanded gives you the relationship as individuals move up and down that demand curve. So at one price, you take, this quantity. As the price comes down, you take a larger quantity. As the price comes farther down, you're willing to accept or demand a quantity that's larger. And for most goods and services, the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. There are a few really rare exceptions, but that is what is called the law of demand. As price goes up, you request fewer quantity demanded. Price goes down, you want more quantity demanded. And that is, you're sliding along that demand curve, and it gives you those different combinations. We have said at this point, we haven't said anything about shifts in the demand curve. All we're talking about is quantity demanded, which is different than demand itself. Demand itself is a shift in that demand curve. Either if it shifts to the right, that implies that more quantity is demanded at any given price, so it's an increase in demand. If it shifts to the left, it means that there is a decrease in demand and fewer units or quantity demanded is demanded at any given price along that demand curve or that demand schedule. So that's kind of it's a subtle difference, but it's a difference that is going to become extremely important as you move forward. And if you think about quantity demanded, it applies to any good or service that you're interested in. And it's going to give you those different combinations as you slide along that demand curve. And again, and we'll get into it kind of in the third segment of chapter 3, but there are going to be demand shifters that will shift that demand curve. It'll either shift it out to the right if there's an increase in demand, or it'll shift it down to the left if there's a decrease in demand. So those are demand shifters, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But just going back to quantity demanded, demand schedule, it's just a table that draws out prices and quantities. Take them and you can plot them on that demand curve, again, sloping down. And for this particular model, it's a 45-degree slope as we go down that demand curve. And always remember, when you're looking at prices and quantity, what is the main assumption we're invoking? Ceteris paribus, all other things equal, all other things unchanged. We're just looking at prices and quantity when we're looking at the demand curve. And as we talked about earlier in this segment, there are really 6 kind of factors or quote shifters that economists talk about. And if you keep 5 of the 6 unchanged and just focus on price, that allows you to shift up and down on that demand curve, and it will show you, and it'll become very vital as we move forward into this chapter on, that we're talking about not only changes in demand, how things impact changes in supply. And that is somewhat straightforward as we go through it. Where it really gets complicated, and you'll see in some of the other sections or some of the other segments to chapter 3, it's when you have simultaneous shifts in demand and supply. But we'll get into that a little later. That's all I have right now for talking about demands. In the next segment of chapter 3, we're going to actually talk about shifters and what happens to the actual demand curve as these shifters change. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.